In the heart of the American West, an unexpected bond formed between an Apache chief's daughter and a stranded cowboy. When ancient traditions clashed with compassion, her 4 simple words changed everything and saved his life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Let's get started. The year was 1883, a time when the boundaries of the wild American frontier were still being carved by wind, grit, and the will of men who dared to dream beyond the horizon. The sun hung low over the Arizona territory, spreading molten gold across endless stretches of desert and crimson mesas. The land belonged to no one, yet everyone fought for it. The settlers, the soldiers, and the tribes who had called it sacred long before any map bore the word United States. In this fierce land, where every breath carried dust and destiny, a lone cowboy named Jack Turner rode through the fading light, his eyes scanning the rocky ridges ahead for any sign of water or life. His horse, a chestnut stallion named Duke, stumbled with exhaustion, its flanks streaked with sweat and blood. They had been riding for 3 days without rest, chased not by lawmen, but by ghosts of the past and the cruel hunger that came from being utterly alone. Jack had come west from Texas, driven by the lure of work and the quiet promise of redemption. He wasn't a bad man, though he'd been called one more than once. A year earlier, he'd ridden with a crew that rustled cattle from Mexican ranchers near the border. When a gunfight broke out, Jack walked away with a bullet in his shoulder and a conscience heavier than lead. He left the gang, swore never to steal again, and tried to make an honest living as a ranch hand. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. When the herd he was trailing was stolen by bandits, Jack went after them alone, chasing shadows through the desert until he found himself deep in Apache land, a place no white man entered without consequence. His canteen was nearly dry, his mind clouded by heat, but still he rode, guided only by stubbornness and the faint hope that water might lie beyond the next ridge. By the time he reached a narrow valley framed by red cliffs, his vision blurred and his strength began to fail. He dismounted beside a shallow stream, the kind that whispered rather than flowed, and fell to his knees. The coolness of the water was a blessing against his cracked lips. He closed his eyes and breathed, unaware that unseen eyes were already watching from the shadows. From the cliffs above, figures moved like ghosts, Apache scouts, silent and swift. They had been tracking him since dawn, reading every hoof print, every broken twig. In their world, trespassing was not a mistake. It was an offense against the spirit of the land. When Jack's horse gave a startled snort, he turned too late. Spears and rifles gleamed in the sun. Within seconds, he was surrounded. There were 6 of them, their faces painted in earth tones, their hair braided and adorned with feathers. At their center rode a tall man whose presence silenced even the wind. Chief Nantan of the Apache, known for his wisdom and his unyielding authority. He studied Jack with eyes that saw deeper than flesh, searching not just for who he was, but for what his heart carried. Jack raised his hand slowly, knowing any sudden move could end him. "I mean no harm," he said, his voice hoarse from thirst. The chief did not respond. He spoke briefly to one of his warriors, who translated sharply in English. "You ride on sacred ground. No white man may cross here." Jack swallowed hard, knowing the truth of it. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to find my way back." But mercy was not easily found on this land. The warrior spat on the ground and replied, "You will answer to the chief." Bound and escorted by horseback, Jack was taken deeper into the canyon where the Apache camp lay hidden among cottonwood trees. The village was alive with sound, children laughing, women grinding maize, and the rhythmic beat of drums that echoed like the heart of the earth itself. Every eye turned toward him, the outsider, the stranger. Some faces showed fear, others anger. Jack felt the weight of centuries of hatred pressing down upon him, a history he had inherited without ever asking for it. He was dragged before the chief's fire, where Nantan sat cross-legged, his gaze as sharp as obsidian. To his left stood a young woman, her dark eyes calm but filled with an energy that made Jack forget his pain for a moment. Her name, though he did not yet know it, was Tala, the chief's only daughter. When the warriors threw Jack to the ground, Nantan spoke in his native tongue. His voice carried authority, deep and unyielding, and even without understanding, Jack knew his fate was being sealed. After a long silence, the translator turned to him and said coldly, "The chief says you trespass on our land. You must die at sunrise." The words hit harder than a bullet. Jack didn't argue, didn't beg. He simply nodded, accepting the law of the land he had entered. Nantan's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before he turned away, dismissing him with a gesture. Jack was taken to the edge of the camp and tied to a wooden post near the warrior's fire. Night fell slowly, the desert sky lighting up with 1,000 stars, each one a witness to his waiting death. As the camp settled into silence, Tala walked among the people, her thoughts heavy. She had seen many white men before, soldiers, traders, settlers, but none like this one. There was no arrogance in his eyes, no hatred, only weariness and a strange calm. When she approached him, the guards shifted uncomfortably but did not stop her. She knelt near the firelight, her voice low. "You do not fight, why?" she asked in halting English. Jack turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze with tired but steady eyes. "Because fighting won't change the truth," he said. "And maybe the truth is, I was meant to end up here." She frowned, studying him as if trying to see beyond the man, into the story that had shaped him. "You are not afraid?" she asked again. Jack smiled faintly. "A man dies once, but he lives by what he believes." Those words lingered in the cool night air long after she left. They echoed inside her chest, stirring something she didn't fully understand. The laws of her tribe were clear. An outsider must not be spared. Yet her spirit whispered that perhaps this man's fate was tied to something greater, something unseen. She spent the rest of the night awake, sitting near her father's tent, watching the stars burn over the desert. When dawn approached and the first light touched the cliffs, Tala knew that she would have to make a choice between the tradition she had been born into and the truth her heart could no longer ignore. The wind shifted that morning, carrying the scent of dust and smoke. The warriors prepared the place of execution as the chief stood tall before his people. Jack Turner was brought forward, silent and unresisting. Yet in the distance, Tala walked toward them with steady steps, her eyes fierce and unafraid, ready to speak words that would shatter tradition and change everything that was to come. The sun rose slowly over the red mesas, casting long shadows across the Apache camp. The air was still, heavy with the weight of tradition and judgment. Warriors gathered in a silent circle, their faces stern and unreadable. The chief, Nantan, stood tall in the center, his war feathers catching the golden light. Behind him, the women and children of the tribe watched quietly, their eyes filled with curiosity and fear. Bound and weary, Jack Turner stood before them. The dust at his feet glowed like fire in the morning sun, and yet he did not flinch. There was peace in his eyes, the peace of a man who had already made his peace with death. He had spent the night thinking not of escape, but of the strange young woman whose gaze had pierced through the darkness of his despair, Tala, the chief's daughter. Her presence had haunted him, her voice echoing in his mind like a promise he couldn't name. The chief raised his hand, and the circle grew tense. He spoke in Apache, his words rhythmic, ancient, and absolute. "By the law of our ancestors, the land must be kept pure. The trespasser who walks it without permission gives offense to the spirits. His blood must return to the earth as payment." The translator stepped forward, repeating the sentence in English with cold precision. The crowd murmured their agreement. The law was sacred. No one had ever dared to challenge it, until now. Just as the first warrior lifted his spear, a voice rose from the crowd, clear and defiant. "Father, stop!" Every head turned. Tala stepped into the circle, her long black hair flowing like a dark river behind her. The expression on her face was fierce, her eyes shining with a courage that startled even the old warriors. Nantan's brow furrowed in disbelief. "Tala," he said, his voice a growl, "you will not speak here. This is not the place of women." But she didn't stop. She moved closer to Jack, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. "This man is not our enemy," she said in English, her words trembling but firm. "He came here by fate, not by choice." The tribe erupted in whispers. The chief's anger was like a thundercloud. You dare to question our law? He thundered. Would you dishonor your people for a stranger? She met his gaze with unflinching strength. No, father, she said softly. I would honor the truth. He took a step toward her, his voice sharp as the edge of a blade. And what truth is that? There was a long pause. The wind shifted and the camp fell silent. Then she spoke the 4 words that would change everything. He saved my brother. A gasp rippled through the circle. The warriors lowered their spears slightly, confusion flickering across their faces. The chief's eyes widened as though he had been struck. What do you say? He demanded. Tala turned to the crowd and began to speak, her voice strong, her words spilling like a river released from a dam. Many moons ago, when the rains came and the river flooded near the trading post, my brother Chaitin rode out to help the traders. The storm was fierce. His horse fell, trapping him beneath its weight. No one was near, and the river was rising fast. He would have drowned, but a cowboy passing by saw him and stopped. He lifted the horse, freed my brother, and disappeared into the storm before anyone could thank him. My brother told me his name was Jack Turner. The chief's face softened, his fierce pride slowly giving way to disbelief. He turned to Jack, his voice low and steady. Is this true? Jack nodded weakly. I didn't know he was your son. I just did what any man would have done. The chief studied him for a long moment. The desert wind carried the faint scent of mesquite and dust. Finally, Nantan lowered his head. The Great Spirit brings paths together for a reason, he said quietly. A man who saves a life cannot have his own taken. Murmurs spread through the camp. The warriors stepped back, lowering their weapons completely. Tala exhaled, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed. For the first time since he'd been captured, Jack felt his chest loosen. The chief turned to his people and raised his hands. The spirits have spoken, he declared. This man's life will be spared. He came as a stranger, but he leaves as one who walks in peace. The crowd began to disperse, some still whispering in disbelief, others bowing their heads in silent respect. Jack fell to his knees, overcome with exhaustion. The ropes were cut from his wrists. Tala knelt beside him, her hands gentle as she offered him water. You should rest, she said softly. He looked up at her, a faint smile touching his lips. You just saved my life, he said. She smiled back, a small, knowing smile. Maybe you saved mine first. In the days that followed, Jack remained in the Apache camp as his wounds healed. The people grew to respect him, not because of his strength, but because of his humility. He helped gather firewood, repaired saddles, and even taught the children how to lasso. At night, he sat by the fire and listened to the tribe's stories, tales of creation, of warriors, of the bond between man and earth. Tala often joined him, her laughter like music against the crackling flames. Though words were few between them, something deeper grew. A connection born not from language, but from shared courage. One evening, as the desert sky burned with the colors of twilight, the chief approached Jack. When you ride from here, Nantan said, you will carry the spirit of this land with you. Do not forget what was given, and what was forgiven. Jack stood and bowed his head. I won't, Chief. You have my word. The old man nodded and placed a small leather charm around Jack's neck, a talisman carved with the symbol of the hawk, the spirit of protection. So you may always find your way home, the chief said. The next morning, as the first light touched the cliffs, Jack prepared to leave. The tribe gathered quietly to see him off. Tala stood beside her father, holding back tears she couldn't hide. Jack mounted his horse and turned to her one last time. I'll never forget what you did, he said. She smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. And I'll never forget what you believed. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and handed her a small silver coin, the only thing he owned of value. For your brother, he said, a reminder that kindness is stronger than fear. As he rode away, the wind carried the scent of sage and the echo of her words. He saved my brother. He looked back once, seeing her silhouette framed against the rising sun, proud, unbroken, and forever a part of him. In that moment, Jack Turner understood that the frontier wasn't just a place. It was a test of the heart, And somewhere in the vast silence of the Arizona desert, a cowboy and a chief's daughter had proved that courage and compassion could cross any border, even the invisible one between two worlds. When the horizon swallowed him, Tala stood alone by the cliffs, the silver coin glinting in her hand. She whispered softly into the wind, repeating the words he had once told her by the fire. "A man lives by what he believes." And the wind seemed to answer back, carrying his voice from far away. "And a woman saves by what she dares." The desert held the echo like a sacred prayer, and in the endless expanse of sky and stone, two souls remained forever bound, by honor, by destiny, and by four simple words that defied tradition and changed everything.